From New York, this is Democracy Now!
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America.
In a nationally televised address following the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, President Trump condemns white supremacy but fails to acknowledge his own racist rhetoric that was echoed in the manifesto of the anti-immigrant gunman who killed, at this point, 22 people in El Paso. Trump proposed no new major gun control measures, but instead blamed video games and mental illness for the spike in mass shootings.
Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
We'll get response from two leading gun control advocates. Plus, we'll speak to Manny and Patricia Oliver. Their son Joaquin was killed last year in the mass school shooting in Parkland, Florida. They just happened to be in El Paso Saturday to unveil a mural near the U.S.-Mexico border on what would have been Joaquin's 19th birthday. And we'll get an update on the political crisis in Puerto Rico. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The death toll in Saturday's massacre at an El Paso Walmart has gone up to 22 people after two more injured victims died Monday. The gunman posted a racist anti-immigrant manifesto online 20 minutes before the shooting. Hours after the massacre in Texas, a gunman shot and killed 9 people in Dayton, Ohio, and injured dozens of others. Trump addressed the nation Monday and called on Americans to, quote, condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. In his manifesto, the El Paso shooter said he was, quote, defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion, unquote. So far this year, Trump's reelection campaign posted over 2,000 Facebook ads that include the word invasion, referring to migrants. Trump has also repeatedly used the term in speeches. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus asked Trump Monday to stop using the language of invasion when describing immigrant and refugee communities. Trump went on to blame the mass shootings on violent video games, mental illness, and the, quote, dark recesses of the Internet.
Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
Trump did not call for major changes to the nation's gun control laws, but earlier in the day wrote on Twitter, quote, Republicans and Democrats must come together and get strong background checks, perhaps marrying this legislation with desperately needed immigration reform, he tweeted. In his address, Trump also called for the death penalty for mass shooters. Last month, the Justice Department announced the federal government is resuming capital punishment after nearly 2 decades. As he signed off from his televised address, Trump named the wrong Ohio town in reference to Sunday's shooting in Dayton, saying, may God bless the memories of those who perished in Toledo. Cesar Sayoc, the avid Trump supporter who last year sent homemade pipe bombs to CNN and high-profile Democrats, including the Obamas and the Clintons, was sentenced Monday to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors said Sayoc should receive a life sentence for sending the 16 do-it-yourself bombs, but the judge determined that, although he hated them, Sayoc had not intended to kill his victims based on the flawed design of the devices, which never went off. Sayoc's attorney said he was radicalized by reading Trump's tweets, watching Fox News, and reading conspiracy theories on the Internet. Tensions are mounting over the disputed region of Kashmir following India's revocation of its special status Monday. Kashmir remains on lockdown with Internet and other communications blocked and leaders placed under house arrest. The status change would mean Hindu Indians from outside Kashmir could buy land and settle in the region, among other actions that'll shift the demographic makeup of Indian-administered Muslim-majority region. Critics and many Kashmiris say this would threaten the state's autonomy, further consolidating it into Indian rule. Protests were held across Pakistan Monday as political and military leaders convened today to discuss the issue. Raja Farooq Haider, the Prime Minister of Pakistan-administered Azad Kashmir, issued a stern warning saying Pakistan's army would defend the region and make, quote, a graveyard for Indian soldiers, unquote, if, quote, India dares to try any mischief over Kashmir. The Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan said India's actions were a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, while the UN is calling for all parties to exercise restraint. The political crisis in Puerto Rico continues as its Senate sued against the appointment of Pedro Pierluisi as the new governor following Ricardo Rossello's resignation last week. Pierluisi was sworn in despite not having been confirmed by the Puerto Rican Senate. Pierluisi argues he's in the line of succession for governor after being nominated as Secretary of State by Rosselló last week. San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz also sued after Pierluisi's swearing in. Pierluisi's law firm represents the unelected federally appointed control board with sweeping powers to run Puerto Rico's economy. Puerto Ricans also say he represents a continuation of the corruption and status quo in Puerto Rico's leadership. The Treasury Department designated China a currency manipulator after it allowed its currency to weaken to an 11-year low amidst the ongoing trade war with President Trump. China's move came after Trump last week threatened to impose a further 10% tariff on $300 billion of Chinese goods. Trump lashed out Monday, accusing China of using currency manipulation to, quote, steal our business and factories, hurt our jobs, depress our workers' wages, and harm our farmers' prices. Not anymore, he said. China also directed state-owned companies to suspend imports of U.S. crops. Economists have refuted Trump's claims that China will bear the economic brunt of increased tariffs, saying U.S. consumers will, in fact, suffer the most. Stocks dropped in response Monday, with Wall Street suffering its worst day of 2019. President Trump signed an executive order Monday imposing new sanctions against Venezuela and the government of President Nicolás Maduro in what amounts to a near-total economic embargo. The latest move freezes the property and assets of the Venezuelan government as the country grapples with ongoing sanctions targeting its oil industry. The Wall Street Journal reports the sanctions are on a par with those against North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. The Venezuelan Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, said in an interview Venezuela is, quote, facing a transnational legal coup planned by the U.S. government. Venezuela has been plunged into a political crisis following the attempted overthrow of Maduro by the opposition leader Juan Guaidó in January. The ongoing unrest and U.S.-imposed sanctions have crippled the Venezuelan economy. According to the United Nations, around a quarter of Venezuela's population is in need of aid, and 3 million people have left Venezuela since 2016. Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, is speaking today at a conference in Lima, Peru, where he'll reiterate U.S. support for Guaidó. Special Envoy to Venezuela Elliot Abrams and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross are also set to attend the meeting. In southwestern Libya, officials say a drone strike on the remote town of Merzouk on Sunday killed 42 people and injured 60 others, 30 of them critically. The UN-backed government in Tripoli blamed the assault on forces loyal to the Benghazi-based warlord Khalifa Haftar, who launched an offensive in April aimed at seizing the capital. Haftar is a former CIA asset whom the White House has praised for his, quote, role in fighting terrorism and securing Libya's oil resources, unquote. The singer and accused serial pedophile R. Kelly has been charged in Minnesota with 2 felony counts of prostitution and solicitation involving a minor. R. Kelly's accused of luring the girl, then 17, to his hotel room where he offered her $200 to undress and dance for him. R. Kelly is currently behind bars in New York, where he faces multiple federal criminal charges for abusing women and girls. He was arrested last month in Chicago and indicted on counts including obstruction of justice, child pornography, and sexual assault. Police in Galveston, Texas, apologized following outrage over a photo showing horse-mounted officers leading a handcuffed black man down the street with a rope. The man was arrested Saturday on a misdemeanor trespassing charge. The president of the Galveston Coalition for Justice, Leon Phillips, said the officers humiliated the man and that the photo was reminiscent of racist images from the 1920s. James Douglas, the president of Houston's NAACP, also lamented the photo, saying, quote, this is 2019 and not 1819. And in media news, 2 of the country's largest newspaper publishers are merging. Gatehouse Media acquired Gannett, which owns USA Today, among other papers, for $1.4 billion. The new company will own over 250 daily newspapers and hundreds of other weekly and community publications. The company, which will retain the name Gannett, will own over 1/6 of all daily newspapers in the United States. Critics warn the merger could result in newsroom layoffs and that local reporting may be sacrificed in favor of stories produced remotely and republished across many of the company's newspapers. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world. The death toll in Saturday's anti-immigrant shooting rampage at a Walmart in El Paso has risen to 22 after 2 more victims died Monday. It is one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. Just before the shooting, the gunman published a manifesto claiming his actions were being done in response to what he described as a, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas. Parts of the manifesto echoed President Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric. Most of the dead in El Paso were Latino, including 8 Mexican nationals. 13 hours after the massacre in El Paso, a gunman in Dayton, Ohio, killed 9 people, including his own sister, after opening fire outside a bar.
On Monday, President Trump addressed the nation about the twin shootings. Trump condemned white supremacy but did not acknowledge his own anti-immigrant rhetoric.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
President Trump also laid out a plan to confront mass shootings, but said little about enacting any new form of gun control.
First, we must do a better job of identifying and acting on early warning signs. Second, we must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. Third, we must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
We're joined right now by Igor Volsky, the executive director of Guns Down America, the author of Guns Down, How to Defeat the NRA and Build a Safer Future with Fewer Guns. First, your reaction to this double massacre this weekend, and what you think needs to be done.
Well, of course, it's absolutely tragic, but it's not surprising. When you combine hate, when you combine racism with easy access to firearms, you get tragedy. And so when we think about what we have to do, I think the number one thing is we have to ensure that firearms are harder to get in this country, particularly firearms that were designed for the military, that the gun manufacturers in this country are pumping into our communities. They're making these guns more dangerous every single year. They're using advertisements that pull in military themes. And so when you see a mass shooter walk into a situation and use an assault weapon wearing military fatigues, they're actually using those firearms as advertised.
And, of course, it's not just a mass shooting. So they always get the biggest attention in the media. But what is it, 100 people a day on average are being killed by guns in the United States?
Yeah, it's 100 people a day. It's about 40,000 people every single year. Most of that, as you point out, is everyday gun violence using handguns. The problem with...
And the majority of it, people taking their own lives by suicide.
Yeah, 2/3 of it is suicides. Until 1989, the most popular handgun in America was a revolver. Now it's a semi-automatic pistol that has a high-capacity magazine that uses larger rounds. Those rounds are coming at you faster. That's not an accident. That's because the gun industry made a decision that they're going to start making these weapons more dangerous because they wanted to sell more weapons to folks who already had them. The federal government can stop this.
So let's talk about how the federal government can stop this. First of all, in both Dayton and in El Paso, do you believe, we don't know everything about how they got these guns, but they got these guns legally?
It's because the standard of gun ownership in America is somewhere in the basement. It's so incredibly low. We have to raise the standard not only for gun ownership, but also for gun production. So why don't we have a gun licensing system in the United States where if you want to own a gun, you have to go to your police station, you have to get fingerprinted, you have to pass a written test, you have to pass a field test, you have to go through a much more comprehensive background check. There's a waiting period, and then you could get your firearm.
Senator Cory Booker has demanded licensing, like you license a car.
Exactly. Senator Booker, Mayor Pete has that. Former Governor Hickenlooper has that as well.
Let's turn to Senator Cory Booker.
There's one thing we don't all agree with when it comes to guns, and I think it's common sense, and over 70% of Americans agree with me. If you need a license to drive a car, you should need a license to buy and own a firearm. And not everybody in this field agrees with that, but in states like Connecticut that did that, they saw 40% drops in gun violence and 15% drops in suicides. We need to start having bold agendas on guns.
Bold agendas. Does it sound like what even the Democrats are now proposing the Senate, if Mitch McConnell will call a special session, Mitch McConnell, who's at least fractured his shoulder apparently at his house in Kentucky, if he would call a special session, what they're proposing for the Senate to pass?
Well, they're proposing that the Senate pass the House-passed background check bill. The House passed that measure in February 27th. It would extend background checks to almost all gun purchases. It's a step in the right direction. It doesn't go far enough. And, while I appreciate the calls for Mitch McConnell to call a special session, I think all of us together could set ourselves ablaze on Mitch McConnell's front lawn, and he wouldn't do anything. He's established an entire political career around carrying the NRA's water. And so what I don't understand is why champions of gun reform in the Senate, the people who marched with us in Parkland, the people who promised they would fight for us, why they're not back in Washington, D.C., showing the nation that they are ready to pass legislation to disarm domestic terrorists while the other folks are on vacation. People want to see a fight on this issue. They're so tired of a mass shooting. We talk about it for 3 days, maybe, and then nothing happens. Lawmakers have to fight for this. We can't wait for McConnell.
I wanted to ask you, in the absence of any government action, substantive government action, what else can be done? You've raised the issue of private corporations, specifically Walmart, the role of Walmart in the selling of guns in the United States.
Yeah, this is significant. Walmart's the largest seller of guns in the United States, just given its size. And if Walmart decided to take a stand on this issue, it could have a big difference. So my demand of Walmart is, number one, stop selling guns, period, until we can raise the standard of gun ownership in this country. Stop giving political contributions to lawmakers who take money from the NRA. And also invest in the communities that you serve. Fund gun buyback programs all around those communities. They have a role to play here. As you point out, legislative change, particularly on the federal level, takes a really long time. So it's up to us to organize all voices of society to help build that future with fewer guns.
You have this call for Walmart to stop selling guns. They were selling them in the El Paso Walmarts. They were selling them in Mississippi, where 2 employees were just killed last week. Companies like Dick's Sporting Goods just stopped selling weapons. Is that right?
That's right. And they've stopped, I think, with assault weapons. They've raised the age. They've moved in the right direction. But they need, clearly, as this act shows, they need to go further.
We're also joined by Chris Brown, president of Brady, formerly the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, named for James Brady, who was shot in the head during the attempted assassination of President Reagan. Chris Brown, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you lay out what you're demanding? And do you feel that what the Democrats want the Senate to vote on right now is enough?
What we're demanding right now is that Mitch McConnell call the Senate back into session and consider the 2 measures that have been passed by the House to expand Brady background checks and ensure that a background check is done before every gun sale. That's H.R. 8, S-42 in the Senate. They could just pull it up and vote on it. And a bill to close what's the Charleston loophole. That's the loophole that allows a gun sale to proceed even if a background check hasn't come back in 72 hours. It's called the Charleston loophole because that's how the shooter at the AME Baptist Church in Charleston got his gun. Yes, we want those 2 measures to be brought up. We want McConnell to call the Senate back into session. Is that enough? No, because gun violence is an epidemic in this country. It's not one solution that we need. If you're looking at an epidemic that claims 40,000 lives a year, you need a multi-pronged solution. We also need to ban assault weapons. We need to restrict high-capacity magazines. And we do need funding for states to enact what we call extreme risk laws. Those are the laws that have been talked about a lot lately that allow law enforcement and family members to seek a court order to remove guns from an individual who is at risk of doing harm to himself or herself or others.
And Chris Brown, your reaction to the president's statements since these two weekend shootings, his emphasis on that hate and that hate is behind and mental health issues are more to blame than guns themselves?
Yeah, I think that what he pointed to yesterday in his speech were video games and mental health issues. The reality is we have a global market for video games in this country. And the United States doesn't experience any greater degree of mental illness than any other industrialized country. What we have more of than any other industrialized country is gun violence. So I was very disappointed that he seemed to use the NRA talking points, and it's no surprise. The NRA is the greatest single contributor to Donald Trump, and that he stuck to a script that's about every other issue except the core issue, which is guns and the appropriate regulation of guns in this country, an issue in which the vast majority of Americans, Democrat or Republican, red or blue state, agree what the right solutions are, and they're the ones I've just laid out.
In a statement Monday, the NRA praised Trump's speech, writing, quote, "The NRA welcomes the president's call to address the root causes of the horrific acts of violence that have occurred in our country. It's been the NRA's longstanding position that those who have been adjudicated as a danger to themselves or others should not have access to firearms and should be admitted for treatment," the NRA said. Chris Brown, the NRA is imploding right now. This is a critical moment. If you can address what that means, that the NRA does not wield the same kind of power. You have these horrific massacres this weekend following so many others. There's the 250 and 251st mass shooting just this year.
Yes.
What this means that the NRA is just embroiled in corruption, and New York is investigating the NRA as well.
New York, the District of Columbia, we're about to file a petition with the IRS to ask the IRS to also investigate them. They're suing their marketing firm. They're being countersued by that marketing firm. And the headline for the NRA should really be lies, corruption, and deceit, because that is how they have run this business. And make no mistake, this is not a nonprofit. It's not operated as a nonprofit. It is a mouthpiece for the gun industry. Average, everyday gun owners don't support the actions that are being taken by the NRA, and in part, it is the lies. Let me just correct the record on what the NRA said with respect to mental health. If they really believed that, why would they have pushed President Trump to overrule a rule that had been put in place by President Obama to have the Social Security Administration put names into the Brady background check system of individuals who had been adjudicated mentally ill by the Social Security Administration? In the first 60 days of Trump's presidency, the NRA had Trump reverse that rule because they didn't want those names in the background check system. So that is just a complete lie. They have never wanted to have the solution be any restriction on any kind of gun. And that is because they want to sell guns to anyone, anywhere, anytime, and they don't care about who gets killed as a result.
Igor Volsky, I wanted to ask you, your organization has also been promoting the campaign Disarm Your Bank. Yeah. Can you talk about the relationship of banks to gun violence?
Is your bank loaded? Is yourbankloaded.org? Look, the reality is we need to change the way the gun industry operates. And so if the lawmakers in D.C. aren't going to do it, we have to rely on other levers of power. Banks are a natural fit in this. And so our message is when you bank your hard-earned hard-earned dollars should not go to fund the gun industry. And so if folks go to isyourbankloaded.org, they can see a report card of how much business their banks have done with the gun industry. And then on that site, push their bank to live up to their own corporate values and stop doing business with that industry until it stops manufacturing military-style weapons for the civilian market. And by the way, right now, you have a merger going through between BB&T and SunTrust to create the nation's sixth largest bank. BB&T said in open hearings in Congress that it will continue to do business with the gun industry in this merged form. This is after we found out that they arranged millions of dollars in loans to Smith & Wesson about a year and a half before Smith & Wesson assault weapon was used to kill 17 people in Parkland. People need to take action on this.
Chris Brown, is Brady supporting an assault weapons ban? I mean, you have the assault weapons ban that sunset in 2004. Two-thirds of the American people supported it, but it was not renewed. Of the 40 deadliest mass shootings, only 2 occurred during the time that ban was in effect. Afterwards, 26 of them occurred. Why not demand at this point, with the entire country, in many cases across the political spectrum, in horror at what has taken place, call for an assault weapons ban?
We have called for it over and over and over again. Anytime I make any media appearance, any press release we put out, I just said it a few minutes ago. Absolutely, we have to have a renewal of the assault weapons ban. Brady crafted that assault weapons ban. The only thing that we really objected to is the last-minute NRA-led compromise that put a sunset provision into that law. That's why it expired after a decade. Congress did not have the political will to renew it. Brady has long had a legal arm as part of what we do. We're proud to have had a legal function at Brady for 30 years, and we have represented almost every locality and state that has adopted an assault weapons ban, and you can be sure the NRA has attempted to attack those in state after state after state, and we have successfully defended those laws and ensured that they have been held entirely constitutional and consistent with the Second Amendment by every court that has ever looked at the issue.
Do you think Democrats are going far enough?
Look, we have a gun violence prevention majority that we helped elect to the House of Representatives in 2018. They have passed 2 measures. I'm proud that they did that. They funded the CDC for the first time in 20 years. They've put $50 million toward gun violence prevention. I would like to see them take up the other measures that are pending. There's an assault weapon ban bill pending in Congress. They should take that up. There are extreme risk laws that have been crafted to provide a federal cause of action to seek an extreme risk order, as well as to provide critical grants to the states to implement these laws. The House should also pass these measures. So I would like to see them do more. And even if what we are doing is basically continuing to put pressure on the Senate, that is what we must do. I think too many members of Congress still, and Mitch McConnell is a classic example of this, they get elected and they forget that they're elected officers. Basically, they are representing people. They're not representing corporations. They're not representing industries. They are representing people. And all of us have to remind our elected officials that that is just the fact.
Igor Volsky, we have 15 seconds.
Well, look, I want to see Democrats go down to the floor of the Senate, filibuster, place holds on nominees on bills, do whatever it takes, really, really fight for all of these reforms.
We want to thank you both for being with us. Igor Volsky, Executive Director of Guns Down America, author of Guns Down, How to Defeat the NRA and Build a Safer Future with Fewer Guns. And thanks so much to Chris Brown, President of Brady, formerly the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, named for Jim Brady, the press secretary of Ronald Reagan, who was shot in the head during the attempted assassination of President Reagan. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Mexico City. 8 nationals died in the massacre and aftermath in El Paso. Stay with us.
Now the hacienda's dark the town is sleeping. Now the time has come to part, the time for weeping. Vaya con Dios, my darling. Vaya con Dios, my love. Now the lonely mission bells are softly ringing. If you listen with your heart, you'll hear them singing. Vaya con Dios, my darling. Vaya con Dios, my love.
Bernie Fender here on Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
As we continue to look at Saturday's mass shooting in El Paso, we turn now to focus on the gunman's racist, conspiracy-fueled vision of the world. In a manifesto that echoed President Trump in parts, the gunman wrote about a, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas. He also promoted a white supremacist conspiracy theory known as Great Replacement that has been cited by other mass shooters.
Our next guest has long called out racists for promoting such views. In December 2017, George Ciccariello-Maher resigned from Drexel University after a year of harassment and death threats from right-wing white supremacists. The threats against him and his family began after he tweeted in 2016, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide," mocking the white supremacist ideology that white people are being replaced by communities of color and non-white immigrants. George Ciccariello-Maher joins us today from Mexico City. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Your response to the two massacres in Dayton and in El Paso. In El Paso, at this point, the number is 8 Mexican nationals have died in that attack, where the gunman cited the Hispanic invasion.
Well, there's not much to say beyond the fact that, of course, this is a continuity of what's been going on for a long time in the United States. But unfortunately, I think what we're seeing is a real crystallization in the El Paso attack of the ways in which Trump's anti-migrant panic and rhetoric and hatred, dehumanization of migrants, of the migrant caravan, has dovetailed seamlessly with broader white nationalist, white supremacist theories developed in France, theories that influenced, for example, the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, theories in which this paranoid vision of the world is painted, in which those who, of course, have the most power in the world, white people, are painted as the victims of a replacement, as the victims of genocide. And so you have this trajectory, it goes from Europe to Christchurch to the United States, in which this idea of replacement has fueled not only white supremacist violence, mass shootings, but these are the same theories, of course, that were so important for Steve Bannon and others in the Trump administration. And so it's no surprise that these things are coming together. Sadly, what we're seeing in the brutality of El Paso is the ways in which these theories are crystal clear in inspiring open acts of violence, alongside the everyday acts of violence, the murders by vigilantes of migrants on the border, deaths at the hands of Border Patrol, family separation, and the everyday violence of border policing.
And this whole issue of the gunman's raising this claim of a Hispanic invasion, when, especially in Texas, because obviously those who are familiar with the history of Texas know that there was a prior armed invasion that occurred in Texas in the 1820s and 30s of Anglos who moved into what was part of Mexico. This whole concept now that raising the fear among Americans that there is an invasion occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. The absurdity is incredible when you think about the fact that this was a state that provoked a war through armed Anglo invasion, and which continued after annexation, after seizing Texas from Mexico, continued to dispossess formerly Mexican Latinos and Tejanos of their land, of their possessions by force. And this, of course, is the background of Texan history. And it really, I think, points out the absurdity of this theory that really inverts the world that we live in. When you read the El Paso shooter's manifesto, he says, I'm not instigating this. They are the instigators. I am the victim. I am the one who is being forced to act. And you see this in a lot of white supremacist narratives today. And it really helps to explain not only the prevalence of these theories, the ways that they tap into mainstream culture. You don't have to say that you're the master race. You can simply say that you're under attack, or you're the victim of diversity, or you're the victim of affirmative action, to feel this kind of white resentment. But it also it convinces that these shooters that they need to act. They are in the face of a catastrophe, a biological, genetic catastrophe that they need to confront. And this is part of what's behind this wave of shootings. This is what we really need to grasp and what we really need to understand today.
And 8 of the people killed in the shooting in El Paso were actually Mexican nationals. During a press conference, Secretary of Foreign Affairs Marcelo Ebrard called the shooting an act of terrorism against Mexicans in the U.S. and said the Mexican government will look into whether there's enough evidence to solicit the extradition of the gunman to face charges in Mexico City. This whole issue of the presence of Mexican nationals, and also on Monday I wanted to mention also the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said the United States needed to do more to control the sale of weapons. This is what he said.
Controlar la venta.
The U.S. needs to control the indiscriminate sale of weapons. I say this with all due respect. It is not our intention to meddle in the internal matters of any country. But yes, the matter should be reviewed because it has an effect on many, and in this case, it affects U.S. citizens, and it also affects us.
That was President AMLO. Your reaction?
Yes, I mean, it's been clear for a long time that despite the U.S. narrative, one heightened and amplified by Trump, that somehow violence is seeping northward across the border from Mexico, Mexicans have long known that it's actually U.S.-made weapons that are being funneled en masse across the border into Mexico and fueling the amplified violence of the past few decades. This is absolutely clear. And in a way, it's very good, I think, to see the López Obrador administration pointing out the fact that this is an attack on Mexican nationals, the fact that it is an attack that is geared toward racist and ethnic ends, as a way of really putting a point on what's happened and making clear that this is not just another massacre, it's not just another individual with mental health issues or someone who is playing violent video games. It's an attack on people for very specific reasons. At the same time, I think we should be careful to not get lost in a clash between two governments, the United States and Mexico, and to lose sight of the fact that many of the migrants, in fact, most of the migrants that Trump has been demonizing have been Central Americans, right? Have been migrants that have been gone through their own travail passing through Mexico, which is not always a safe or welcoming place for those migrants. And so it's good to see the Mexican government taking this action. We must also realize that the migration crisis is a much broader one. Again, it's one that happens on the ground. It's important to understand that the shooter in El Paso saw himself as participating in border control. His goal was to prevent people from migrating. His goal was to push back what he saw as an invading wave. And the same thing is being done by Minutemen on the border. The same thing is being done by pushing migrants themselves out into the desert and toward death. And so this is a much broader policy that goes back into democratic administrations as well that we need to confront.
Also, Uruguay issued a warning for its citizens who are traveling to the United States in the aftermath of the 2 deadly mass shootings, warned them of deadly hate crimes against them. George Chikarelomar, can you talk about the difference in how President Trump has treated white supremacists and anti-fascists? 2 weeks ago, Trump tweeted, "Consideration is being given to declaring Antifa the gutless radical left whack jobs who go around hitting only non-fighters, people over the heads with baseball bats, a major organization of terror, along with MS-13 and others, would make it easier for police to do their job," Trump tweeted. Wants to put Antifa on the terror list.
I mean, this is not surprising coming from Trump. It's a diversionary tactic. Antifa, the death count of Antifa is still 0. But the point is precisely, and more importantly, that Trump has coddled and encouraged white supremacists because these are, they represent an important part of his most radical base. He did not want to alienate them, and this is why after Charlottesville, for example, he spoke of good people on both sides. He has always sought to use dog whistles and other forms of communication directly with Antifa. Steve Bannon, again, represented a direct link with white supremacist and fascist organizations who were directly involved in pushing policy initiatives in the White House. These connections are known and they are clear. Trump withdrew and diverted funding away from taking seriously white nationalist violence in the United States and has continually tried to emphasize instead the violence of so-called black nationalists, the violence of anti-fascists. When the reality is, what we need to understand is that it is Antifa that has done the organizing in the streets. It is Antifa that has done the information collecting that has allowed for many of these white nationalist organizations to be weakened, to be driven back, that has pushed people like Richard Spencer to admit that they can't really organize in the streets anymore. This is what Antifa has been doing, and it's not just Trump that's been undermining it. It's been Democrats. It's been those who want to equate Antifa with fascism itself. But we need to, I think, all stand up and embrace anti-fascist organizing. Of course, not attacking innocent people who haven't done anything, but embrace the fact that fascism will not go away by itself. This is something we've been told over and over again, and what we're seeing today is that these white supremacist organizations are going to continue to attack members of the Proud Boys, members of Identity Europa. These are all mass shooters waiting to happen. They are preaching hatred. They're participating in hatred, and they're engaged every day in attempting to make the United States a much more hateful country. This kind of violence is the inevitable result.
And George Ciccariello-Maher, I wanted to ask you, President Trump today proposed tightening background checks, but suggested pairing any kind of gun legislation with immigration reform and somehow linking these two. I'm wondering your reaction to this surprising announcement.
I mean, it is surprising because he's taking, in effect, the cause, one of the main causes of this massacre, and trying to make it look as if it were the solution. The reality is that he is the one who is engaged in this kind of anti-migrant rhetoric that is pressing people like the El Paso shooter to the margins, who are then going and reading theories of the Great Replacement that inspired, for example, the Christchurch shooter as well, reading these documents online, and then jumping into action. If you read and unfortunately, I think people should read the manifesto of the El Paso shooter, because you see exactly that this is Trump's rhetoric, but it's also the rhetoric of border control that's been pervade for decades under Democrats, under Republicans. It's the kind of rhetoric that tacitly allows these things to happen. CNN, not just Fox News, Tucker Carlson, of course, is a great purveyor of the myth of white genocide and white replacement, but CNN ran a headline about the disappearance of white America. These are the kind of things that passively allow this paranoia to seep into a mainstream white America, that in a context of devastation economically, in a context of economic suffering, allows people to be mobilized, to be radicalized by these white nationalist organizations, which are spreading, which are using the internet, and which are encouraging people through 8chan, which luckily it looks like has been weakened, encouraging people to engage in these kind of attacks.
We want to thank you so much for being with us. Yes, it looks like 8chan has been brought down, the place where the shooter allegedly posted this manifesto, this anti-immigrant, racist, white supremacist manifesto, something like 20 minutes before he opened fire. George Ciccariello-Maher, I want to thank you so much for being with us, political scientist, visiting scholar at the Hemispheric Institute at New York University, author of Decolonizing Dialectics, speaking to us from Mexico City. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a couple from Parkland who lost their beloved son decided on what would have been his 19th birthday to go to El Paso to raise a mural in his honor. Then the massacre happened. Stay with us.
It's no easier to swallow the 1000th time. The front page becomes a graveyard, and some don't bat an eye. It happens enough to call it common place, and there are many who don't seem to mind. So raise your voice for the ones who can't anymore. There's something here to fight for. Raise your voice for the ones who can't anymore. No, we can't keep standing still, 'cause look what good that's done.
Raise Your Voice by Madison Yearsley. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
As we continue to cover this weekend's deadly gun violence, we're joined now by Manuel and Patricia Oliver. On Saturday morning, they were just miles away from the El Paso, Texas Walmart store where the mass shooting took place, commemorating what would have been the 19th birthday of their son, Joaquin Oliver. Joaquin was one of the 17 people shot dead during the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day last year, when a former student armed with a semi-automatic AR-15 assault rifle opened fire.
Manuel and Patricia Oliver had traveled to Ciudad Juarez across the U.S. border into Mexico to visit an immigrant shelter in honor of their son, saying no child should ever be separated from the parent, not by gunfire, not by border control agents. And the couple was going to El Paso when they got word of the mass shooting. They were heading to paint a mural to commemorate their son's life and passion for immigrant rights. Many of their murals also call for an end to gun violence in honor of their son. The mural at Las Americans Immigrant Advocacy Center, an El Paso nonprofit dedicated to advocating for immigrant and refugee rights, was scheduled to be unveiled Sunday evening. Well, we're going to Fort Lauderdale now, not far from Parkland, where we're joined by Manuel and Patricia Oliver. They just flew into Florida from El Paso last night. Thanks so much for rejoining us again. We spoke to you when you were here in New York, and our condolences on this weekend. Again, your son Joaquin would have been 19 years old. Describe how you learned that this massacre had taken place at Walmart.
We were, thank you for having us here again. We were notified by friends calling us. A lot of our friends and people that knows what we do were a little concerned when they started listening this shooting in El Paso, and they knew that we were in El Paso. So they started calling Patricia's phone, and at some point it got a little weird that everybody was asking, "How are you? Are you okay?" And then right after that, a few minutes, we've heard like, "Hey, there's a shooting going on here in El Paso, so maybe we should go and see what happened." So we were in Ciudad Juarez at this moment, as you said, visiting an immigrant center, and then we went back to El Paso to see what we could do. But yeah, that's the way that we had to again go through a mass shooting pretty close to where we were.
And your reaction to the almost predictable now reaction of national leaders after every one of these mass shootings, and a lot of words said initially, but then most of the time, almost invariably, it's forgotten.
Well, you know what? I think some things are changing already, and I want to think that way maybe, but I haven't heard so many thoughts and prayers. Maybe they're starting to understand that nobody is going to play the game that way. But of course, we were watching the president when he was talking to the nation, and he was actually reading to the nation what he thought. So it's a whole. You don't read your emotions. You're not honest 100% with your feelings when you have to read how you're feeling and what you think it should be done. So leaders again disappoint me. The governor from Texas, shame on him. I mean, the way he's endorsing the NRA since it's been years, and actually, the reality is that we're all targets. In this particular case, yes, Latinos and Hispanics and immigrants, but at the end of the day, we are all targets. You, me, Patricia, everybody.
Your thoughts, Patricia, on President Trump saying he's going to El Paso and Dayton. The mayor of Dayton said, is he going to Dayton or Toledo? Because, you know, in his address, he gave condolences to the people of Toledo. But so she said she wasn't sure where he was going. But it's very clear. I mean, people like Beto O'Rourke, who was the congressman from El Paso, said he is not welcome here. Your thoughts on this as people who lost their own son in a mass shooting?
Well, Amy, first of all, thank you for having us here, sadly, but again, under these circumstances. Really, I agree with Beto, because one person showing that attitude and increasing that division that he's been doing, talking about Trump, of course. And then he's pretending to go to El Paso, showing what? If obvious, that what he's been saying in the past is been having consequences. And these consequences are in the community of El Paso. El Paso is suffering the discrimination, is suffering the white supremacist hatred that is being seen by this president. This president has to think about it first, where he's going. And after he realizes that he's going to a place that he's being just suggesting that we have to have these kind of divisions, and due to the support of all lobbies related with gun violence, I think that he should be thinking more than once. Because that reminds me myself, when this happened to us here, that we're still waiting for him to come. So it doesn't matter where he goes. It matters what he does. And if he does really good things and he takes action of his own words and responsibilities of being saying that kind of things in the past, discrimination, hatred, division, we're going to talk in a different way.
And I wanted to ask Manuel, this is the 30th mural you've done since your son passed away in various cities across the country. You did one outside the NRA convention in Dallas. What's been the reaction of ordinary people who've seen these murals of yours, and your hope for a possible change in terms of gun regulations, gun laws?
There's a few things going on with the murals. I think that the most important one is that these are not art pieces that I paint. These are statements from Joaquin. And it's a way to turn a victim into an activist. And we feel good about that, because we continue with our parenting role. And we also think that Joaquin deserves that opportunity to defend himself, to represent other victims. So that's basically the main idea behind the murals. Now, the other thing that we thought when we started this, I'm an artist. This is my only skill. I have very few skills. That's one of it. So I use it. I didn't turn myself into anything different after I lost my beautiful son and my best friend. We think that untraditional ways to connect people and to make impact easy, fast, it's like an advertising billboard. It will be something that might work. I don't believe in traditional ways of fighting gun violence. There's been years of gun violence, so we decided, you know what? I'm not going to spend time talking to a politician in D.C. I can do that all day long. I have tried it. I'd rather stay 30 minutes, paint a wall, get it out there, everybody will see it, and now you have a reaction from a social point of view. And in a few years, hopefully not so many, we will see that change of behavior from society. That's the whole point behind the murals.
Are you calling for an assault weapons ban?
100%, of course.
And you're saying that President Trump has never come to Parkland?
No, well, very close when he plays golf. but
exactly.
no partner.
He goes to Mar-a-Lago, and when that happened to us last year, he was, as far as I can remember, he was visiting the injured ones in different hospitals, but no more than that. He offered to come more than once. Actually, because that didn't happen, we invited him to come home and see Joaquin's room, and we didn't get any answer yet. So I don't think that going to a place with no meaning what you're trying to transmit to people, it doesn't matter. You stay home and stay in the White House and do something better, more worth it. Finally.
Well, clearly what happened with Parkland is Parkland came to Washington and led by the student survivors, 800,000 strong, marched in Washington, D.C. It's also where we saw the two of you. We want to thank you both so much for being with us, Patricia and Manuel Oliver, parents of Joaquin, killed last year at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School massacre in Parkland. He would have turned 19 years old this past weekend. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we end today's show looking at the political crisis in Puerto Rico. On Monday, the Puerto Rican Senate sued to block the appointment of Pedro Pierluisi as the new governor following Ricardo Rossello's resignation last week. Juan, if you can explain the latest and what this means. New governor in Puerto Rico.
Well, yes. Well, at 5 p.m. Friday, Governor Rosselló officially resigned, and just before that, he named a successor. He claims a successor, Pedro Pierluisi, who is not the Secretary of State as per the Constitution, but he named him Secretary of State to be able to succeed him, but only the House of Representatives of Puerto Rico, voted by one vote majority to approve Pierluisi, but the Senate did not on Friday and postponed till yesterday, meeting on the issue, and that, of course, raises a constitutional crisis in Puerto Rico without precedent, because is this named governor the real governor? Is he legally able to hold office? Well, Pierluisi spent the whole weekend meeting with agency heads and other government officials, but did not make any public appearances. And he's insisting that he is the governor. The Senate then met on Monday and did not vote. They basically said
they have to approve the governor.
Well, some say they do, and they're claiming they do. That they have to approve Pierluisi as the Secretary of State, which they have not done. So they're claiming that he's not officially the governor, and they have now gone to court, to the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico, which has told both sides to come in with their legal briefs by noon today, so that the Supreme Court will then look at the briefs and supposedly make a decision within the next few days. But in the meantime, virtually few legal scholars or the media are recognizing Pierluisi as the governor. And you have this situation where the Senate does not recognize him as the governor. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
And Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, hasn't she sued?
She's filed her own lawsuit. Yes, she's filed her own lawsuit against Pierluisi being named. So there are two lawsuits, but I think the Supreme Court is hearing the Senate's lawsuit.
And who is Pierluisi?
Well, Pierluisi, interestingly enough, was the resident commissioner for many years. He's of the same party of Rosselló, but he's also the brother-in-law of the chairman of the Promesa Board, the financial control board that is running Puerto Rico. He had a law firm that was representing, that was doing work for the Promesa Board, and he also was a lobbyist for AES Corporation, a Virginia-based company that was polluting Puerto Rico with coal ash from their plant in the southern part of Puerto Rico. So he's got all kinds of conflicts that make him unlikely to be supported by the majority of people to remain as interim governor.
Well, we'll continue to follow this and talk about it tomorrow on Democracy Now! To see all our coverage of Puerto Rico, visit democracynow.org. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkting, the Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warnoff, Libby Rainey, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masu, Trina Ndur, Maria Studio, and Maria Torres. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez on Control.